Um, Good afternoon again. Hi, folks. I'm Zach Brim, agroecologist and hemp specialist at the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. I work from the Tropical Research and Education Center in Miami-Dade County and represent the agronomy department. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the UF Hemp website events page in about a week or so. Once we get the recording and link on the website. The chat will also be saved. Just a note to please conduct your participation in this meeting with respect and kindness. Mute your microphone and video. In the case that you've received an invitation to ask a question or speak on a topic, don't forget to unmute. The goal of the meeting, code of conduct, is an open and welcoming environment that may include differing viewpoints and constructive criticism. Speakers should present facts and findings from their own experiences. The chat will be left open for questions, comment, and dialogue among hosts and participants. I encourage everybody to use the chat actively. You may also choose to send a message directly to other participants. I'll pause after each major section of the presentation to respond to questions in the chat, and I have Kevin and Ajit on hand to help me with moderation of the chat window. The presentation will last about an hour, with an additional hour available for questions and discussion. And a note to please fill out the exit poll at the end of the presentation. It's going to help us with our work and going forward. So let's get started with the meeting. Kevin, can you give me a thumbs up? Let me know that you can see the screen. Hear me okay?
Yep, gotcha.
Thanks. All right, hi everybody. Today's topic is the first of a half a dozen that we're going to be doing throughout the year. We'll be meeting on the first Monday of every other month, starting today in February and meeting again in April. Today's topic is hemp permitting and planning. And this is a presentation that was put together with work from folks across the University of Florida IFAS hemp team. And those folks are listed here, as well as, of course, a lot of important information and feedback from folks at FDACS as well, Florida Department, Agriculture and Consumer Services. So first, I just want to start with some introductions, and we're going to get a chance to practice with the chat window. Couple different things we're going to try here today. So just to give everybody a chance to shake their fingers and introduce themselves in the chat window, write a note to everybody just with 4 pieces of information: your name, your business or organization, sort of whoever you're choosing to represent today. If you would like folks to be able to reach out to you directly as part of this interaction, then you're welcome to share your email or your phone. I want to stress that part is optional. And then in a word or a few, put your biggest hemp challenge so far. So I'm going to count to 10, and we'll see if anybody's interested in introduce themselves. Thank you, Bert, representing FDACS. Okay, good, it works. We have several folks from FDACS and the University of Florida joining us as well, and hopefully a number of you folks out there are growers. I see a lot of chat coming through. Thank you everybody for introducing yourself. The whole point is that I'm going to spend the better part of an hour talking at you, but also like to have some feedback and interaction as well. And so if you have questions for folks on the chat or others, then there's also the opportunity to ask those questions in the chat and to interact with others. Folks are still typing in the chat, so I'll ramble on a few more moments. I don't see, though, anybody who's mentioned challenges. So let's see. Just trying to learn is one. Federal regulations. Thanks, Brian. I'm not sure I'm going to have a lot of information there, but we can certainly try to cover that. Someone here mentioning they're completely new. Just hemp fiber seed choices. All right, I got a thumbs up extra there. Okay, well, this got us started. Hemp fiber harvest and processing. Good. These are topics that we'll certainly be covering. Thank you, Marley, mentioning product sales as a question. So good. This is a good audience for us today. A good chance to bring folks up to date. Now the other piece that I want to see if folks can accomplish with this introduction is to change your name. Zoom allows you to do that. So change your name in a way that'll help us, the group that are participating today, maybe know a little bit more about you. So some folks have, for example, mentioned that they're looking for seeds or product information or interested in fiber processing. So if you happen to be someone with seeds on the call or have some information about fiber processing, you might change your name. So by going to the participant tab and then this more drop down, and you can rename yourself. So I, for example, would be UF Hemp dash Zachary Brim. I didn't have a chance to do that earlier. I probably have to come out of, oh no, I can do it. So I'll do it while I'm talking to you. Let's see if I can get that participant tab, rename myself, and then I'm going to be UF Hemp Zachary Brim. So now, as you're paneling through, if you're interested in asking someone a question from UF, then you would be able to see that. So a little something silly, but just trying to get us a little bit more chance to interact as we go through. There you go, Jeff. Thank you very much. Tropical fruit expert here on the call. And we can debate whether or not cannabis is a tropical fruit, perhaps, but that would be something for later. All right, introductions aside, I'm going to charge forward with the meeting. John, that's okay. Your space bar is not working. I appreciate you putting something in there anyways. All right. So getting started, introducing hemp. I want to be very clear about this. It is an important distinction, botanical and legal distinction here for this potential crop species. Cannabis sativa is the botanical name as named by Charles Linnaeus. And the legal aspect of that is with the total delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, less than 0.3% per dry weight. And that's a critical distinction for how we operate our permits and how we operate our cultivation. And a lot of that information is available here in this Hemp 101 document, AG 458. So if you choose to grab that QR code, it'll take you to the EDIS page and allow us to allow you to see that information. So all in all, hemp is a regulated crop. And that comes by the distinction between hemp and marijuana, and that legalese here pulled from the Florida statute basically includes hemp or any part of it, seed, a flower, a plant material, and things that you might process from or extract. Any of those pieces have to comply with the less than 0.3% total delta-9 THC concentration in order to be within this definition. So economically and ecologically, important factors of the work that we're doing out of the University of Florida, of course, important for farmers as well. And so economically, the landscape has changed very much just in the last several years since we've been doing the work here in Florida. It's well established as an alternative crop, I'd say. The conversation is continuing over the last 4 to 5 years. But following that initial rush of enthusiasm and returns to a few of the earliest farmers in the program, by and large, was still waiting on that economic and market demand. Ecologically, holds to be a potential risk for invasion into Florida's natural areas, and so want to make sure that that's a critical piece of the farming operations and the research going forward as well. So I mentioned the definition for hemp as a species, a botanical definition and a legal definition, but there's also multiple different crops, and those crops are going to be threefold in my mind. So you're harvesting the stem and plant material prior to flowering for a fiber crop. There are two types of farm fiber: the external fiber, those bast fibers, which are more suited for textiles, and then the inner fibers, the hurd material, which is more like a pulp for paper or insulation, things of that nature. The grain or the seed comes from the pollination of the flowers. So there are male and female hemp plants out there. That is one of the very interesting botanical features of cannabis sativa, that it is dioecious. So there's independently plants that are males and independently plants that are females. Both of them have to be out there and flowering at the right time in order to produce that seed. And then, of course, there is the flower production that's unpollinated. This is usually a feminized plant, so there are only female plants out in the farm or the greenhouse, and usually those flowers are extracted for cannabinoids like CBD, cannabidiol, or the terpenes that help with the smells and the flavors. These uses are described in the AG 459 document if you are navigating over there for information. So there's a lot of information out there, and these are the two places that I would recommend anybody starting. The QR code over there on the left goes to the hemp website for the University of Florida. I'll suggest that you check out the frequently asked questions page or the resources page. That's where most of our information is available. We've also been publishing in our extension service. Our extension publications are called EDIS or Ask IFAS, and there's a number of publications up there as well. Many folks visiting with us today from FDACS, and their website, Hemp Cultivation Licensing, is live again, and that's available at fdacs.gov/hemp. And that information includes very important checklists and frequently asked questions as well for folks that are going to be diving into the permitting. So let me pause for a moment. I had mentioned that I would do that before any of the new sections. So before I move on to cultivation licensing, does anybody have any questions about the plant, the crops, or the definitions related to that, how to find resources? I'll just pause for a moment. I don't see any questions in the chat currently. Kevin, Jit, this would be the opportunity for you to unmute and let me know that I missed something.
Not that I see.
No, all seems good on my end as well. Nothing in the chat.
Okay. Well, just to reiterate then, folks are looking to get some new information, maybe a little bit more information on how to access seeds and develop fiber markets and processing, just summarizing what I've seen before, and we'll be getting into some of that this year for sure. All right, so remember that the chat is working. If anybody has any comments or questions, that's where we put it. I know it works because I see at least some things here. So jumping into the cultivation licensing. So let's just answer this question ahead. So who needs a cultivation license? And that would be a person or business that introduces, moves, or cultivates hemp. So there's that sort of possession of a viable hemp material, whether that's a seed or a plant. And then there's the taking of that seed and plant and moving it through its lifespan in order to develop a crop or a product. And so those folks that possess or cultivate hemp commercially require a license. The license in itself is available for commercial growing only. So just to say that personal use or cultivation is not permitted or licensed in Florida. That's an important detail that you as a business are intending to cultivate for sales. There is no minimum or maximum acreage requirements. And technically, there's no cost for the license. However, the application is an online application, so you'll need a computer in order to do that and communicate with FDACS. And there's also a fingerprinting step that is associated with a background check, and that does cost money. So no direct cost for the license, but certainly a couple of costs associated with getting a license. Also, whether or not you have a license, you'll need to be getting a new license each year after it expires. So the cultivation license portal is here at hemp.fdacs.gov, and it brings you to this wonderful page where you can register. I recommend having as much information as you need ahead of going into the application. So we're going to be going through some of those steps here as far as this information. So you're going to need to collect these pieces of information. Your name or the individual is going to be the responsible person for this application, the business name and tax ID for that business, and the associated contact information. So this is an example that a friend of mine put together, Dr. Trent Blair, prior to a previous presentation that he gave, and you'll notice he just kind of filled in the blanks with a cartoon character, Homer Simpson. It's an interesting question I'd have for FDACS, whether or not someone with an Illinois address would be able to have a cultivation license for Florida. But suffice to say that the cultivation location has to be within the boundary of Florida in order to meet those requirements. I believe the business address would be necessary as well. And then you'll also have several other pieces of information that's going to be asked as part of this application. The market sector, for instance, so what is it that you are producing as a cultivation license holder, seed, fiber, oil, nursery plants, etc. So as I mentioned, there will need to be a location in Florida associated with this application where the cultivation will occur. And so that cultivation address is required along with GPS coordinates. Nowadays, with life devices and smartphones with any sort of mapping application, you can go into and ping or pin your location, and it'll provide you with the GPS coordinate. You can also go into any of the map servers online and recover that information there. So you don't need any fancy equipment is what I'm trying to say. The tax parcel number, that's another piece of technical information that you'll have to gather for the property on which you'll be cultivating. The land use zoning similarly as well, requiring an ag or industrial zoning to gather a license, or a nursery permit associated with that land parcel. They're asking the growing size in acres or square feet, just an estimate of the scale of your operation. And I should note along with this that I'm sort of speaking to a single location, though cultivation license applications can identify the multiple locations that a single business might be operating on. Anticipated planting and harvest dates. Again, these are estimates which you can update, and you will have to update as the season goes along. Assuming that the farm is not exactly the place, or where you grow the hemp is not exactly the place where you'll be storing the hemp, you'll also be asked to include that storage location, address, and GPS coordinates. Now, this last one on the bottom, I want to make sure is not overlooked, this environmental containment plan. So these are best practices associated with containment of hemp seeds and material that might escape cultivation. So in the case of cannabis sativa, it's pretty much hemp seeds. There might be some vegetative resprouting if I don't know. I'm very hesitant to see that based on the work we need to do to put roots onto cuttings, but it could happen. Point being, if there was any chance that hemp would escape the boundaries of your farm field or your greenhouse, the environmental containment plan should acknowledge what those best practices are. So there's a good template available on the hemp website, but just to make the specific connection that the invasion risk associated with hemp cultivation at large scales is why the environmental containment plan is important. And as an ecologist, agroecologist, I'd sort of ask everybody to take that part seriously. And if you're interested in reading more, this link on the bottom here is an article that we published last year describing kind of what's at stake for hemp to be reintroduced as a cultivated plant with potential to escape from cultivation. Is a nursery license required? I'm going to answer that question while I'm here. So nursery license is separate for hemp cultivation license. However, if you intend to propagate hemp as a nursery and sell those plants prior to what would be considered harvest, then you'll also need a nursery license in order to proceed with that business. You're welcome. So these are the sort of steps for a cultivation license. Before you go in and apply, you'll undergo an annual background check. This is ensuring that you don't have any drug-related convictions on your record for the last 10 years. That takes a fingerprint, and the screening through live scan should be available at most police units to help you with that. It costs somewhere between $60 and $80 is what I've been hearing pretty consistently across the state. So there is that cost associated with your application. And be sure that you bring the FDAX number here, the FL925080Z, to include that information with your live scan. Assuming everything goes well and you get your license, congratulations to those who've had a chance to do that already this year or previously. You're going to be obligated, of course, to follow the law and the rules as set up by FDAX. And one of those pieces is a sign that includes your site address and your license number, and sort of a statement that describes that you're growing hemp and it's under a license. With the cultivation license, there's also the annual inspection that you should expect. And as part of that should be maintaining records of your hemp cultivation for 3 years. Now, you will be in touch with FDAX anyways throughout the year as you're testing for compliance. Recall that the hemp crop has to be below 0.3% THC. And in order to be a compliant crop, you have to show that that test passes no more than 30 days prior to harvest. And so you'll work with a testing facility to come out and to sample your crop, bring to their lab. They provide you the results that show it's less than 0.3%. And along with that, you're also sending a harvest notice to DPI hemp at fdax.gov. And that basically says, on this date, I plan to harvest the hemp, and it is compliant based on this test. That's important information for FDACs to keep track of the licenses. And it also helps us here at the University of Florida to have an idea of how much acreage is approved each year. So we're just again to keep the chat window moving along. This is a chat poll for you folks. So just a number. I'd like you to write your answer as a number in the chat, and then the wait for the signal to send. Okay, so I'm gonna show you the question. You're gonna write the answer in the chat, and then I'm gonna say send, so that everybody sends their answers all at once, and we don't game. So how many acres of hemp was approved for harvest in 2022 in Florida? So take a second to think about that question. How many acres were approved for harvest in 2022 in Florida? Write that number in the chat. And I'm
Hey, Zach.
gonna count. Yeah, Kevin.
Just want to, in the chat there, Hannah from FDAX did say, just to clarify, submit a harvest notice to DPI first, then contact labs to test.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Hannah. I appreciate that. That's an important clarification. All right, but Patty is confused then. Oh, or is that the answer? Everybody's like, I don't know. All right, go ahead. Put your answers in the chat. Okay, let's see. The range is somewhere between, I don't know, 800,000, 10,000, 450, 65, 2. Okay, last moment for anybody to put in a brave answer. Okay, so the my tropical fruit specialist there, Jeff Washaleski, is closest with 65 approved acres. So this year, last year, 2022 approved acres for harvest in Florida was 72 acres. 72 acres approved for harvest. Yeah, good. Congratulations, Jeff. That's not a lot, right? In terms of acreage, in terms of approved lots for harvest, there was about 380. So 380 different lots were requested for harvest. So first you approach FDACs, you say, I intend to harvest on this date. Then you go through the testing scenario, and on the other side, that would be the approval. So in 2021, we had about 550 acres approved for harvest. In 2022, we had 72. So it is first come, first serve each year. No, that's I don't think of it that way. It's mostly a communication tool to make sure that FDACs is available to go through this testing and approval process. So it is not confined by a certain number of acres. This is merely just reporting that FDACs and UF have been collecting and sharing. So that's a good question. You do want to get out a little bit of ahead to make sure you don't run into a log jam as far as timing with the inspections and the sampling and all of that. But operate your business, your grow independently, and communicate with FDACs clearly, and you'll be on good track. That's a good question from the chat. Okay, everybody. So there are several other different hemp relating licenses that may be relevant to your business. And there's a super great frequently asked questions table that FDACs shares with folks to help them help you work with what information and where you're going to need to be in compliance as a hemp business. So if you are a seed dealer and you're testing your seeds oh, okay. I'm going to pause. The grower signs only require phone numbers. That was the template that was available. So I made that change. All right, thank you for that clarification. Phone numbers are necessary on the signs. So if you're working with seeds or your pet food, that is the purview of Agricultural Environmental Services. Those costs are associated per lot. So you'll want to give those folks a call if you're interested in the seed or the pet food. I mentioned the nursery and stock information to include. That licensing is separate, but if you are doing a nursery, then you'll want to reach out to DPI separately. One license for the nursery approvals and complimentary license for the cultivation. If you are interested in processing hemp for sale, consumption, and food establishments, then you'll take on a different licensing. That food establishment license does have a cost associated with it, $650 per business, and that goes through FDAC's food safety. The numbers listed here. Also, you as a food business, you may be under the umbrella of the Florida Department of Health as well. That number following. So there's a lot to know. We're focusing here today and through the year on the cultivation side of things, but there are extension agents at UF and certainly folks at FDACS available to answer questions across the other situations as well. Okay, did any other questions come along? I answered those questions as they came. I'm sort of having a good chance to follow up with questions.
Not really.
All right. So this is the next piece that I promised for everybody today, the budgets and the marketing. So as I sort of hinted at from the question we did in the chat poll, there's been somewhat limited approval of harvests, or say it in a different way, there's been few grows that have been asking for approval or have made it to the end. So there are somewhere between 13 and 25,000 licensed acres over the last several years in Florida, but many of those acres are being unused or don't make it to a harvest. The harvested acres is sort of what I was mentioning at that 500 year before last and 75 last year. So those folks that are making it work are doing so at small scales, mostly for biomass extraction or flour, fresh market flour. Then we're going to sort of walk through what it might take in order to develop a successful business from the economics here, and tells a similar story. But of course, in order to really understand your pathway and your story, we have to go back to the various different uses and crops for hemp. So you got to make a choice. And a lot of this information is available at the uses for hemp. But your market outlook is going to impact the way that you grow this crop and the way that you sort of work to develop crop quality. So that fiber and stem has a whole bunch of things, from paper to bedding to biocomposite plastics, construction materials. Folks are excited about hempcrete, and there might also be some environmental things coming along, the environmental remediation, carbon sequestration. Those markets would be best served by the fiber crops. And then you can also grow for seed, and those are can be used for oils. The hemp seed oil is used as an oil additive for some medications and health foods, cosmetics, etc., the lotions. You can also just have a whole hemp seed as a additive or extra ingredient to your salads, shakes, and things like that. The flour, as I mentioned, is where they extract for the cannabinoids, which is what's in Epidiolex, one of the first FDA approved drug, cannabis and hemp related drug. And so all of these things, so many options. How do you choose? Perhaps some of this budgeting will help, but also what type of farm you operate, whether it's something that's very much tooled up with the equipment for row crops, or if you're growing in a nursery setting or other sort of controlled environment, might impact the way that you approach this. So this is a lot of information all at once. And this is prepared by the economics team at IFAS Extension, the Hemp group, sort of put together a lot of this information. What's more important here, I think, to understand is all of the things that you'd be spending money on. Farmers, you've been going through for generations. This is probably a pretty standard enterprise budget for you. You got a sense of all the things you've got to accomplish and pay for. And we worked one up here for hemp. This budget here for fiber hemp. So between your prints, your seed, fertilizer, irrigation, all the labor costs and testing requirements, including both variable and fixed cost. What's the land rent and the machine upkeep? The hemp economics team comes up with an estimate of cost per acre at $6,700. Just an extra moment there to look around. The remaining questions here are whether or not you're going to include insurance costs. Pesticides are very limited in availability and labels for hemp. Are you going to sort of add in pesticides that are available into your system? The drying and the processing, this is not a trivial thing in Florida, where hemp crops should be drying down shortly after harvest, but harvest timing tends to be some of the wettest months of Florida. And then are you going to get some help from somebody? All of those costs are not included in this $6,700. The flower production is more of a horticultural crop and certainly plays out in the type of labor and materials cost. The irrigation is covering the land with drip lines. The labor is very much hand planting and hand harvesting. Processing of the flowers with the cutting of the leaves and the buds and all that. So the extension economics team came up with a cost for flower production to be $17,000 per acre. Again, similar questions. That doesn't include insurance, pesticides, processing, and consultation. So this being cultivating hemp can be an expensive proposition. So what's the markets look like, and what's the main takeaway here in the economics is that it's a hard row to hoe. That there are probably many small acreage facilities and grows here in Florida because of the way that the economics work out. You've got to have a buyer, perhaps a contract, and doing that with high quality flower is the best case so far for doing that in Florida. Can we make it work with fiber and seed? There's certainly a push for that at the UF Hemp program. Several projects that have been awarded funding that we're working on those contracts in order to move down the supply chain with fiber production. Working directly with fiber processing as a partnership to make those economics work. But here's what I got for the fiber and seed on the upper right-hand corner, $6,700 in the cost. And then if we make about 1,800 pounds an acre, just sort of a ton an acre at just short of a quarter a pound, we're only making $432 per the acre. So something's got to happen with the market or the cost for us to work that out. And similarly with the flower, if we assume about 2 pounds of flower per the plant, we do 5,000 plants per the acre, which is a little bit sort of moderate to high planting density. And we're at current price at $1.50 per pound, which is far afield from the $3.50 a percentage point a pound. Back in 2018, 2019, it's still hard to make that difference. So be mindful of that. The invasion risk, the market risk is an important part of all this. And and we're working to gather that information and help you folks develop your business. So just a point to the need to control the market and that production risk that I said. Try to have a market if you can, and those contracts are something that you want to look at with extra scrutiny. Perhaps hiring a lawyer in order to do that. Work with the insurance folks, see as the crop comes along with the federal programs, opportunities for a whole crop insurance or hemp specific may become available. This whole discussion about cost to determine potential profitability, that's this the tone of what we're trying to say today, and hope you pick the right time. So the initial boom is probably over, but there is still potential. Folks are still doing the work. There still are farmers that are producing hemp and making money doing so in Florida. And so we'll be watching for that new demand with processors and products coming up for the next coming years. Okay, so that's the last point there before the question. So $1.50 per pound for primo flour. Where did we get those numbers? So we've been monitoring a couple different sources, and I can pull those up, but that came from a discussion with our economics expert on the UF Hemp team, Trent Blair. It comes from a combination of the economics services that are collecting those numbers, as well as several news articles that we've been collecting to look at that. So $1.50 a pound for flour. You might get a better price if it is indeed premium flour, if you got that terpene mix. If you have a direct buyer that's willing to pay you more, then of course, that's the variability that we're seeing in the market at this time. So thanks, Marley, for that question. Anybody else with questions? Okay. So this is a lot of information. Again, a recorded presentation, so you're able to come back. Also, a lot of this information we're going to be gathering this year for a grower's guide, and so we'll be putting it in written form as well. This farm planning is very much an exercise that I encourage all farmers to do, and I come at it from the perspective of an agroecologist, but this is a very sort of standard form to consider. And that we're not going to have enough time to really go through all the details, but I at least wanted to draw folks' attention to it. The document or the form that I'll be using will be available with the recording, so anybody can come back here to find that reference as well. So I mentioned that you'll have to choose a hemp crop, fiber, grain, flour, and some folks will tell you that there's dual crops or multi-purpose crops out there. It's definitely one of the major talking points in the industry. There's so many different uses for hemp. Let's do more with our land by cultivating for multiple of those uses. I've yet to really see the industry do that successfully. I think the demands on the crop, both from a market and a crop quality, have kind of put a barrier to doing the dual crops, but otherwise and there are some ways that you can consider. So you choose a hemp crop and then you get to work. Thank you very much for coming. Have a good day. That's my bad joke for today. But really what I mean is ask yourself these questions first. That's my best recommendation currently, is to think about this, getting involved in the hemp industry, the risks and the potential for economic viability very deeply. Of course, the University of Florida Hemp Program is here to assist you with information and potential partnerships. And it starts here with developing this hemp farm plan. And so it starts with the dates and putting together how your year is going to go. I've heard from many folks that they can do multiple crops for a year in the same land. I've seen marginal success with that if you're able to get it through, but the flowering dynamics of the genetics are going to be a really important part of that. Sort of who you got working with you or for you. What is the land preparation, the density, the spacing? What kind of buffers did you commit to in your environmental containment plan? And then all sorts of questions related to where does your materials come from? How do you put it out? And what equipment are you using to do that? So the planting would be the seeds or the plants. The irrigation would be the water and its application, similar for fertilizers and crop protection. The harvest, note, of course, the special thing for growing hemp is that you're going to have testing requirements and the timing in order to get that approval. And then the monitoring, whether that is environmental weather monitoring or the environmental containment monitoring. How are you maintaining your personnel and equipment? And then what are you doing in terms of contingency? What happens next and what could possibly go wrong? So this is kind of the template of things. I'd encourage you all to be able to fill out all of these spaces in the form before you go ahead and plant hemp. There's a lot to think about before you just get started. I mean, so in abstract, these are the details that some might fill out for their form, depending on which crop you're interested in. These crops very much do look differently, particularly the flower crops distinguished from the row crops for fiber and seed. For instance, here you can see in the density 1.3 million seeds an acre versus 2,500 plants an acre. Doing it from direct seed, coming from the transplants, and the amount of time that it takes for these crops to develop are going to be different as well. So we'll get into some of these different crops, the details of them at our next meeting in April, hopefully hearing from some farmers who've had a chance to do this, had a chance hopefully to do this successfully, and we'll be able to pick their brain about how they've developed their plans. So I mentioned the dates, and I just want to talk a little bit about some science today at today's meeting, just to share with you some of the information we've gathered from doing the work here in Florida. So I mentioned that there's both males and female flowers, and so they appear on different hemp plants. Primarily, there are some genetics where they're on the same plant, but by and large, the genetics we've been working with here in Florida are the dioecious. And what you'll see is latitude of origin is a very important part of how these plants behave in Florida. So this was a hemp crop planted in May 1st, some from European origin and some from Chinese origin. And they were planted on the same day. They were given the same management, but the European plants flowered within 3 weeks to a little bit over 2 months, whereas the latitude that more matches Florida, the southern latitude from South China, held on with vegetative growth between August and September in some cases. So those genetics that you choose from and how they respond to the light environment, the day length, or more importantly for these plants, the length of the night and the darkness is what drives these plants to flower. And so we did this experiment out in the field as well. And the takeaway here from this paper was actually super exciting, was that these plants are very sensitive to light. And folks that have been growing indoors with supplemental lighting would know this. If your exit sign or computer monitor is left on, it's going to impact the way that these plants respond to the light environment. And so the amount of light that corresponds to the critical day length or period with which these plants will flower roughly corresponds to civil twilight. So that's not the sun up to sundown. That's the minuscule amount of light that appears ahead of the dusk and dawn. Source of seeds and plant material is something that we've been following as well. Access to reliable genetics for Florida is still something that is a struggle for me, even as a researcher and representative of the university. These are seeds from the same seed lot. So just to say, variability in these genetics is very high. If you're growing for flower, you're probably choosing to get transplants, so clones or feminized seeds. So that might change a little bit. Certainly, we're seeing these sorts of variability in seed lots for the grain and the fiber as well. This is the piece that I'm most interested in, the fertilizer and irrigation best management practices. So this is how do we give enough water and fertility to our plants while also making sure that we don't use up the water or leach the fertility into the water, harming water quality. So again, this is some work that we've been doing at the University of Florida, where plants indoors with liquid fertilizer don't need a lot. So after 50 parts per million in nitrogen sort of has enough, and we can very quickly over fertilize with these plants that are getting stunted from the fertility. Over here, we've been doing field studies as well, and somewhere between that 100 and 200 pounds of nitrogen is landing to be a best practice for Florida. Certainly, you don't need the whole bucket of fertilizer, and something closer to the 100 seems to be that balance in plant productivity and potential leaching. So these are some guidelines that we put together a couple of years ago for the University of Florida. The research sort of holds to this, probably not to exceed 150 pounds of nitrogen per the acre, maybe less for fiber than the flower, as the fiber actually stretches and loses a little bit of quality with more fertilizer, and do it in split applications. Everything moves through the soil here in Florida, and so spread it out across the year a little bit by little bit. The phosphorus is a big deal for Florida, getting this nutrient recommendation intact. Currently, relatively minor phosphorus amendments are necessary. In the several phosphorus trials we've done across the state, background phosphorus was sufficient in order to cover the needs of these plants. So we really didn't have to be adding any phosphorus. And potassium is something that the crop's going to need, similar to the nitrogen, and maybe about at a similar rate. And so I just sort of wanted to echo myself here that the research is showing that less than 150% nitrogen per the acre is sufficient. Doing that at the split applications, maybe breaking it up by 50 pounds. More does not mean better, and we've showed the challenges of excess fertilizer is a problem for this crop. So it can delay flowering or development of cannabinoids even. So the THC production is an issue. We've had a lot of crops that we've done experimentally with the research program that has exceeded the 0.3% THC. So you really have to harvest at the right time, though that's more driven, it seems, by the genetics than the environment. And also be watching out for the micronutrient symptoms and those deficiencies and toxicities we've been seeing as well. So I mentioned the harvest testing. So just to reiterate, you're going to contact FDACS. You're going to tell them you have an anticipated harvest date. Then you're going to go along as per their instructions and go for the sampling and the testing, lab testing for that THC. They're going to sample from the upper 15 centimeters, 8 to 10 inches or so of the main stem. That's going to be a lot of flower in some crops. Which is going to be a high cannabinoid development. They're going to send it to the lab. They're going to send you back a result. Comes back 0.3% THC. FDACS approves that lot and field for harvest. Now, cannabinoid development happens very quickly, especially for these flower types where they're bred to express cannabinoids at very high rates. And so this is an example of some research we did up in North Florida, where even after 2 to 4 weeks we saw spikes in the cannabinoid THC development, total THC, and you see it never really comes down. So knowing your genetics, knowing your crop, having a chance to do it a couple times ahead of a big scale operation to make sure you're within compliance of the harvest guidelines. It's 0.35 or less with less than 30 days prior to harvest. So, you know, for all the chance that I had to tell you about what we're doing here in the University of Florida and how we hope to assist you with your development of a hemp crop. Now it's really time to get to work to spin it back on you, see what other questions that you have, try to get these answers to fill out this farm plan ahead of growing a crop. At this point, probably looking at mid-April to end of June as potential planting windows, depending on what genetics you have and what you're looking to get out of it. And that's a whole bunch of extra segment that we'll be working on given our discussion in April. So burning questions from the chat. I see one that came through. Can I sell my crops to the dispensary? The answer in Florida is no, because the laws in Florida require complete vertical integration for the medical marijuana treatment centers. So those folks are growing their crop under the same business as they are selling their crop. And so although you might have a hemp crop that's legally compliant for hemp and also high quality for a dispensary, there isn't a transfer from one to the other. There are folks that are buying and selling hemp flower outside of a dispensary, and maybe that's the dispensary that you're asking about. Again, you'll need to have a harvest approval and compliance in order to transfer that material to any of your buyers. Otherwise, I do not think that Florida restricts who you sell to, other than it's a very important idea to remember that the folks that you sell to as well should have the appropriate licensing and for the processing or food establishments. And I have a request to show the FDEX numbers shown earlier in the deck. And let's see if I go back to that. Is this one? All right, John. There's your those numbers that I included. Also, hemp.fdex.gov for the application, or fdex.gov/hemp for their information. Okay. And I am going to try to get to the end where you folks can see my information. And also while I'm answering anybody's additional questions, I am going to put together the exit poll, which I thought I had. Maybe I have too many windows open. Well, there's supposed to be a poll that I can share with everybody. Ajit or Kevin, or can you help me set up this poll? There should be a poll option underneath. I had it working earlier, I
You
thought.
see,
Oh, I found it.
I think
Oh,
I
it's
just
it's
launched
running.
it.
Good. All right,
Sorry.
everybody. thank you so much for joining us today. I make this a 2-hour meeting, so we can have some discussion. If you'd like to put another question into the chat, we can continue there. Otherwise, if you raise your hand using the reactions button, then we can call on some folks who might be interested in asking a question. So in the meantime, please navigate over to that poll that should have opened for you before you leave. Thank you very much for your participation.
We did get a question from Patty. Why such a
Okay.
drop in production?
Yeah, Patty, that's a thoughtful observation. My sort of understanding of the situation is that the markets have been saturated across the nation. The 2022 USDA numbers are lower as well across the board. Some of the economics that folks are doing, the estimate maybe 14,000 acres for flower production would saturate the current demand for CBD products. And well, 14,000 acres is more than what we have licensed here in Florida, and certainly on the order of hundreds of thousands of acres are being planted and cultivated across the country. So I think it's the folks that have been able to work directly with the processor or a market that have been able to continue their businesses, and that's happening at a small scale, high quality hemp for those extraction or fresh market. So that's kind of my interpretation of the scenario. I think a lot of folks are interested and have had a chance to give it a try. If the markets come along, they have the expertise in order to jump in. I also think that there's a big struggle with access to seed and plant material. So whether or not you're keen to get started, you know, if you can't get the seeds to grow, that's certainly going to put a damper on the acreage that makes it to harvest as well. Those are things that we're working on very actively this year here at UF, bringing in some partnerships that will help farmers access the seeds within these partnerships, help farmers interact and make connections with the fiber processing companies that'll help bring up the acreage in Florida. So we'll be watching that number closely here over the next couple of years, and it's a good question. Let's see, was there another question that came up, Ajit?
Yes, Terry had a question. It's is a license required to develop varieties that are suited for growing in Florida?
Yes, a couple different licenses, perhaps. So for growing to develop genetics, that would still be a cultivation. You would still have access to a viable plant material, and you'd be making new plant material. So yes, you would need a cultivation license. If you were selling that seed, then you would also need a seed dealer's license. If you were selling plant material prior to harvest, then you would also need a nursery grower's license. And so each of those individual pieces will affect how you go about it. If you are working on developing new genetics, then of course also be mindful of what it would take to get those genetics protected, which include information about where the genetics come from, that you have the rights to go through the breeding, and that you can articulate the uniqueness in that variety in order to pursue. All right, Ajit, I can see the questions coming along. Do you have a variety that has a delicious seed? That's a good one, John. I think the several of the seed varieties we have been working with show the bigger seeds, which is probably the ones that are more tasty. And as far as which ones work here in Florida, many of those similarly are Chinese origin, or some of the Southern Europeans as well. Actually, interestingly, many of the Southern Europeans that are good fiber crops tend to be good seed crops here. I haven't done a taste testing on all these seeds yet, so I'm hesitant to declare which one is most delicious. But hemp seed for all of those oils and processing is definitely something I know folks are interested in out there. All right, is our seed choice only IASCA certified seeds, or has it expanded? The rules on the books are certified seed or pilot project approved. So those are the limits. And the expansion would be left for the enforcement of those rules. Hey, anybody want to ask a question or make a comment in person? You want to raise your hand, say anything, or add any comments? If anybody from FDAX is still here, I welcome you to join to make any clarification or introductions. Anybody from the UF team would like to say hi, recognize where you're from. For potential folks on the call, let's take a few minutes, see if we can make a conversation out of this. In the meantime, thank you to those folks that have filled out the exit poll. Please do so if you haven't. And thank you. So we did have another question come into the chat. So are timing and nutrient management the two biggest factors that can affect the THC percentage? Specific pests to be worried about. All right, so yeah, Alfredo, these are a lot of the questions that we're going to be talking about in the April meeting. I would say, as based on the consensus on the debate going on with hemp researchers, the genetic feature, the genetic composition of your plant is going to drive the THC development most strongly. So that's not to say there are not impacts from fertility or from pest management, but the genetics are going to be your first benchmark. So let's say it in this way. There are CBD genetics and there are CBG genetics. CBG genetics tend not to make THC because they affect the biosynthetic pathway differently. So that's an extreme example. You could also have flower type genetics versus fiber type genetics. And in some cases, those factors also have to play. Now, of course, the health of your plant and how quickly it's growing based on temperature, based on light, is going to impact the THC development as well. So you do want to be testing early if you're still getting to know your genetics. Pests to be worried about. We're going to have a pests discussion. If not the meeting after April, then certainly during the heart of the year. We're going to hear from folks about that. There are certainly the early root and soil-borne diseases have been a major challenge for our research program. The mold and the fungus in the flowers and the seed heads, that's been an issue. As far as the invertebrates, mostly those leaf and flower munching sort of caterpillars and larvae. Yeah, the whole gamut of challenges we've been seeing here in Florida that we'll have a chance to speak to.
We also received a question asking who in Florida may have the certified seeds.
So one of the resources on the hemp website, the hemp FDAX website, should be a list of that's not available anymore. Current list of hemp cultivation permits. They've also in the past provided a current list of seed dealers. And so that would be a question where you can reach out to FDAX directly. They should have that list of folks that are permitted to deal seeds, and then those folks will be able to have the answer about the IASCA certification. Grow outside or in a high tunnel in mid-Florida. I've seen folks do both. I think it depends on whether or not you're in the shoulder season, trying to rapidly develop those flowers with some light, or if you're using background light or solar radiation. I think better for Ken, I think is going to sort of be a part of the decision you'll have to make, less so than what's been played out in the science. Do deer eat hemp? Yes, certainly, particularly in the Midwest. We've seen, and the Great Plains, we've seen a deer after the hemp fiber and seed. Maybe less for the flowers, which is resinous and bitter, but deer do tend to be a pest for hemp. Did the resources page you showed earlier have a list of fiber seeds? No, it would have a list of genetics we've had previously in our trials and the outcomes of that. I'm very hesitant and cautious to name any variety or any specific vendor based on the type of information that would be coming out of the University of Florida. But we are sharing our information broadly. And there's a link here that came from FDEX. It looks like it's a couple different pieces, so you'll probably have to copy and paste the whole thing. Breeder, foundation, or registered hemp seed. That looks like that list that someone was asked for. Thank you, Angie. Okay, everybody. So we're kind of winding down here a bit. Oh, thank you, Bert. I appreciate that reaction. That's fun for me to see someone clapping. I don't see any hand raising. So I'm going to count to 10. Any last burning questions or pieces of information that our folks are looking out to? And I hope these can be useful over the course of the year. Very much interested in developing a network around this information. I don't have to be the only one with information. You folks have experience and information as well. Struggling from the virtual world, how to really do sort of a network interaction. But be looking out for those opportunities through the Hemp newsletter or others. Just to remind folks, this has been recorded and will be available, and we'll be putting that on our Hemp events page on the program website. My goal is to get it there by next week. I have to ask someone to do that on behalf of the program. So as soon as that link comes out, I'll share it with my colleagues, and we'll try to get that up. All right, everybody. Well, with that, I'll stick around for another 10 minutes or so in case someone wants to follow up with me about anything. But I'll say thank you to the group broadly. Please complete the exit poll on your way out. Thank you very much for your interest and your participation. Plan on getting another link for registration come the end of March for April's meeting. That is April. See how quickly can I get to that date? February, March, April 3rd. April 3rd at 1 p.m. will be our next meeting. It'll be about hemp planting and management practices. So thank you, everybody. Have a good day.